And here we go. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Hybrid Trends. Another video with Jaromir from Dell. And so as we discussed a lot on AVD in the recent weeks with Marcel and Hydra, I was discussing with Samantha about primary solutions, and we were also, and Jaromir and I were also discussing on another video about Apex and about guidance and so on. And there's one guidance, I think, Jaromir, in the Dell portfolio, which gives some sizing guidance on AVD, on HCI. And I think we both agree that you can use those guides, but you need to know what you need to do in addition and how you should read it. So that would be our goal for today. Going through the guide, give some field experience with that, and also especially your experience from a sizing perspective, so that you come to the correct conclusion when you want to deploy AVD on Azure Stack HCI as a customer, and also do a, let's say, correct POC, something like that.
That's true. Hello, everyone. My name is Jaromir. Thank you for the introduction. And probably we should state what is I would say, a problem, right? What is the elephant in the room about AVD, right? So first of all, we released the guide, and I will share the screen later and just show you what guide we are talking about. We did this guide like maybe 2 years ago already. It's been a while when the AVD was in the preview. And when it was in the preview, the way to deploy it was to deploy virtual machines and attached into the virtual machines the AVD agent that would connect it to the pool that is hosted in Azure. And this way was also the guide written, right? So it was not written the way with a new deployment, and the new deployment is being done using the resource bridge in Azure Stack HCI 23H2. So all of this was tested probably on the 21H2 or 22H2 1 or 2 years ago.
Yeah, and with that we have also performance increases on the storage. We have other implications in the session host itself. As you said, the new agent is deployed already via resource bridge. There are other monitoring tools within the service and session hosts, and there were some changes, improvements into the platform, but it also, let's say, reduced the performance of the session host itself due to the additional monitoring. But the platform also improved from a sizing perspective, and that's why maybe if you start with the guide now, you will not get the full proper information, and there is always the overall issue, which are our users and our user behavior. And we discussed it in the prep call. Every user behaves different, even if they have the same user profile.
And it also depends if you are publishing the entire desktop or if you're just publishing some application. You know, you can think of having just one application when something, you know, is obsolete, or, you know, a lot of users they just have iPads and they just need to have some specialized application that doesn't work with iPad. However, you can have it in the remote desktop or in AVD, and you can host it as an application. So then the only thing that will run is the application. And then you, on other hand, you can have a user who will open Outlook and then 30 or 40 tabs in his Edge browser, and then it will just bloat all of the memory, right?
Like me.
That's the difference. Oh yeah, like us, right? If you'll go into our task manager, I bet you that we will consume much more memory than probably around 20 gigs easily.
I just give it a look while you maybe open the guide itself. So without doing, I just have a few tabs open, around 30, and I do a video conference with you. That's all I have open right now, and I'm at 22 gig of my 64 gig memory.
Okay.
So
I'm a little bit more. I'm 30 out of 32. I'm just because I'm still running some virtual machines. But even if I'll drop these virtual machines, I think the system will have like 30 gigs easily, right? It's like a Visual Studio open or Visual Studio Code open, a lot of tabs, themes, you know, some programs on the background. So yeah, I would say the VDI should be for the specialized projects. especially maybe just for the applications, because if it will be like a primary desktop for the users, then it will be possibly too much, right?
Yeah.
So let me just share the screen and just share the guide itself. So I'll make it a little bit bigger. This is a 4K screen. So we do have this VDI design guide, AVD on Dell Integrated System for Microsoft Azure Stack HCI. As I mentioned, this guide was written like maybe 2 years ago, right? And there is the most important one is the sizing guidances and scaling guidances. And also how we kind of validated the scenario, what was used, right? Because as the result from this guide is like having 3 nodes and then like 1,200 users, right? But as we discussed now, you might not have even like 20 users, because if the user will be like me and Flo, he might consume 30 gigs of memory. And then just 10 users will consume 300 gigs of the memory, right? So then it just depends, right? Let me just walk through this guide a little bit, because there are also another things to think about. Let's take a look on the physical architecture, right? So as you can see here, there are 3 nodes with SSDs. And I think, I'm not even sure if these are NVMe's or SSDs. Let's take a look. Storage, all SSDs. I guess these will be SAS, right? So it's even slower. I would probably not go with many disks. I would go with just few drives. I would probably even go with 2 NVMe's, because in the end, you might have just few session hosts. Because Windows 11 is multi-session, so you can have like 1 or 2 per node, and then have like a lot of memory in the Windows 11, and then you will be able to host a lot of users. And then the question is, why more session hosts, right? Because one aspect is, if you will use GPU, you can have 2 physical GPUs per node. Then you can assign 1 GPU per virtual machine, and then just throw users on these GPU-enabled session hosts. That's one aspect, because when you will have more session hosts, then you'll need to partition your GPU. And then if you partition your GPU, it's not like being able to dynamically assign some amount of memory or just portion of the GPU. You have to slice it. You have to slice it to 2, 4, 6, 8, something like that, right? So you have to decide upfront how many slices you want to have from the one GPU, and then spread it across your session host.
And that makes it maybe inefficient from a perspective, especially if you have a mixed user profile on the session host itself. So you maybe have a cat user or someone who needs a bit more, a larger slice from the GPU, and then you have a regular user who needs just for, say, some small video editing or something, and who needs just a smaller slice. And if you have those user profiles not split it evenly, so one user will maybe have too much resources, the other one will have not enough, basically. So that makes the whole planning a bit more, let's say, more complex. And just bring in an aspect in here. So as you know, I'm more into having small specialized clusters. This may be having an overhead on spare servers at some point. But at the end, what I learned is, especially when you're talking about GPUs and AVD workload mixed with other workloads, is as you need to have GPUs in all servers, it maybe makes sense to have those smaller clusters with GPUs, as you said. And then you have the other clusters for regular workloads, like servers, like regular session hosts with users who do not need to have a GPU, who will not just do Office, Outlook, which perfectly can run in a CPU. So what about that aspect?
Absolutely. So that's this aspect with the GPU. The GPU will make your life a little bit harder, right? So you want to specialize it only for you want to assign it only to these specialized users, right? First thing is that you can't live migrate machine. with the GPU. That's the first thing, right? Second thing, even if you would be able to live migrate the machine, you have to assign the GPU on the destination, or you have to remove it, right? And I think that's something we do not support, right? Just removing or the hot adding and hot removing the GPU, maybe with the next versions, right? But in the end, when you will do a maintenance, then you need to probably even pause the virtual machine when you will be restarting the host, right? Or if you orchestrate it correctly, you can just simply do it at 3 a.m. when no one is connected and just simply pause the virtual machine or just reboot the virtual machine together with the host when there's a patch Tuesday.
Yeah,
so plan for this.
Especially with those things, talking about the cat and addicting stations you may want to virtualize, even those could run with 3 at 3 a.m. For example, if you're rendering a cat. In cat something, it takes a few hours, and maybe your user started the rendering when he left the office, and then it still runs, so that it's finished when he's back. And if you then restart, migrate the session host, all his work overnight is gone, and he would just waste another a day of work with rendering his drawings and what he constructed.
Right, that's true. That's true. Yeah. So you have to somehow plan it anyway. So it's not highly available. Yeah. It's semi-stateful, I would say. So I mean, when you have a session host,
it's more like planned for a disaster. So if a host goes down and the user needs to reconnect, then it may make sense. But I wouldn't plan for live migration scenarios in a GPU-based VDI environment, because there's always something running in those GPUs, and you cannot, especially with HCI, you cannot live migrate. So I'm more than into disaster. There's another session host running somewhere, and then bring it up, and the user just reconnects to a different session host with profile.
Yeah, so there was I was probably there are some SSDs, 1 terabyte SSDs here, but I think there was a storage that was attached to these session host, because when I was discussing this with the engineers, I think the way they tested it, they had a 3-node cluster, and this cluster was attached to the 2-node or maybe even 3-node scale-out file server by the FSLogix profiles where it's hosted. So, so one aspect of the planning is how much and how fast storage you have to have on each node, and it's about the logon storm, only because you will have a peak performance needed during the logon storm, right?
Yep.
Mostly, right?
Yeah, and that's perfectly fine using an external storage for your user profiles, as you said. It's also some kind of guest clustering, maybe. If I will put a link on guest clustering.
You can. So for the most users or most use cases, you most likely will have user profile hosted on the virtual machine on the same cluster, right? Which will be fast enough. You can have 1 or 2 virtual machines just to make sure that you are spreading the workload across the multiple nodes. I'm not sure about the guest clustering because the virtual machine is highly available anyway.
Yeah, but it's in the case storing the user profiles. You maybe have SAN storage still there somewhere, and more SSDs in the servers would extend your budget to an extent you cannot handle. So here, at least from my understanding and how I plan that with my customers, is if there's already a storage where you just remove the virtual machines and put them on HCI, why not keeping the user profiles then on iSCSI or SMP array, which can be connected from the session host through, I think in your guide, it's through the management interface. The VM management network adapter.
So there's a management VMs and then a file share, right? So there is a file share where you are connecting to it, and then it's question, right? So how you will connect to this file share, probably most likely the management network. And then again, even if it would be like planning for the high performance, you could have probably in the session host, SRIOV enabled NIC with guest RDMA, and basically have an RDMA end-to-end to the user profile, right? If it would be like really like a big session host with a lot of user profile, a lot of users, with a lot of user profiles, with a low latency, high speed requirement, then you can absolutely do the SRIOV first, and then second you can do guest RDMA. Something that works. I would have to check with engineering if they supports it, but the storage cards definitely supports it, right? So you could, in theory, just populate the virtual function into the virtual machine.
But now with a guide, we agree. I think we both agree on you can learn a lot from the guide already, even if it's a bit outdated from a general perspective. But now I need to come to performance there. Now I need to come to a conclusion how many nodes I need and what I should do to at least estimate the amount of session hosts, the amount of servers, the storage I can use, if I can use remote storage for my users, or if I need to have it locally. So how should we tackle that? So what should we do to at least estimate a starting point for the first, let's say, 500 users?
Right. So we did synthetic tests, right? So first, so all of these guides are working with users that are, they have 3 different categories, like a lightweight user, like a medium one, and then like a hardcore user. I think it has its own name, and in this case, there's like a task worker and knowledge worker, right? Where you estimate what they might be running in the synthetic test. So in this case, login VSI, where you define task worker and knowledge worker, where you have these applications in mind. And then on this hardware that we described was synthetically tested how many users will this session host or will this host handle, right? And then you have here like a knowledge worker and then task worker, and then the amount of the memory and density per compute node you can have. So in this case, task worker, you can have probably just 14 users, right? If you have knowledge worker, 290s.
Here you see which version it was tested, 21H2.
Oh, okay. Yeah, here we go.
Here we go. That's why, especially again to the audience here, if you find those guides on the internet, the internet will not forget those. Even with Dell, they also get Microsoft more than enough, which are a bit outdated. Always look if you find version information of operating systems applies to whatsoever, and then, like we do today, go through those guides, reconsider, talk to an expert, talk to a partner, and get some actual data out of that. From a common understanding, those guides most likely still valid, but at some point maybe it got forgotten and not updated, or for some reasons. I know your colleagues working on a new one, but always try to take a view on which version you're using right now, because there could be a lot of change. In 2 years now, it's a lot of change.
I think the only change would be the methodology of spinning up the session hosts, because with 23H2 you have to spin it using the session, resource bridge. Because
there was also some implication in storage performance, storage handling between 21H2 and 23H2. There's an overall performance change, which maybe is not reflected in such guides,
right?
Which are a bit older. So,
but typically it's not more than like 10%. How you would, differentiate between these two versions?
Yeah.
I think it will not be like that too much, right? But anyway,
in this case, it's not too much, but it could be other cases like SQL or so. When you see there now with older guide, could be a major difference then.
Right.
It's just from a general perspective.
But as you can see, anyway, like the configurations, are like, it can be anywhere between 14 and 300 users per node. So, the estimation here is like you have to think about your workload, and most likely what you need to do is to do a POC.
Yeah.
And then you can do POC with anything, right? You can just spin the multi-session Windows 11 on single node junk hardware you have in the closet, right? And just give it a try, how it will behave. And the way you could do it, it was the same way as the engineers spin the AVD on the 21H2. I do have this lab guide on Dell Geo's GitHub, and I still keep the deprecated labs here. And there is a deploy AVD lab, which is simplifying how the AVD can be deployed. And then there's a deep dive guide that I keep in MS Lab as a AVD scenario, right? This was successful guy. I know multiple customers were POCing this, and how it works is it just simply you will create a host pool in Azure. You will grab the VHD from the Azure and just copy it over into your Azure Stack HCI. It can be anything, right? So you can just copy it over into your Hyper-V host, and then just convert the image from VHD to VHDX and make it dynamic instead of static, and then create a virtual machines that are domain joined. And lastly, what you will do is just to push the AVD agent, right? And then that will register yourself into the host pool. What will not work is that machines will not register. So you will have a watermark that it's evaluation version, right? But probably for the testing, it's more than enough, right? So you can kind of
30 days testing. I think that's perfectly fine.
Right, and you can have, if you have a machine with just one NVMe, you can just put all of one session host on the NVMe, and then it's about a CPU and an amount of memory. And you can just allow like 10 users to work with that and just to test your scenario. And these users will be using that as a primary desktop, you will see how much memory they will consume and how they will affect the performance. In the lab here, this advanced one, I was also collecting the performance with Microsoft Monitoring Agent. But I mean, this one is probably the older one. Now it's Azure Monitoring Agent, right? So this one was with a Microsoft Monitoring Agent, or still is. It still probably works, and it's just collecting the performance metrics, right? So how many users are logged in, how is the performance of the hosts. So you can even use this one just to estimate how big environment you will need, right? And remember, you can even install Azure Stack HCI operating system. Again, it has a trial of 60 days, and even if you don't install, I installed failover clustering into the Azure Stack HCI operating system. You can even create a virtual machines without failover clustering and use it as a Hyper-V, right? Yep. Or just use the Hyper-V or any Hyper-V.
You can also use the Windows
11.
Windows 11. You can use the Windows Server in eval mode for certain days. There is the insider preview of 2025 out right now, which can be used for free. Yes, it's preview version, but for testing.
Exactly. So, and the Windows Server 2025 will also give you probably more performance, right? There were some changes in the NVMe driver, and I was testing some performance on the 2022 compared to 2025, and especially for the VDI, I saw a big difference, right? So, for example, this is VM Fleet testing. We do have another video with VM Fleet. Just search on the YouTube for friends. And
I will link it in the description.
Yeah.
So
and here I tested the Windows Server 2022 and 2025 with multiple S, and if I'll just filter it to the VDI, and in this case 100% with the maximum QoS here, I was able to go up to 80,000 IOPS on this system. This was just 2 nodes, really like a 12 core, like nothing, like small configuration, the MC4520, right? And then there's 180 just like I was like, hey, there has to be a mistake, right? So what I'm doing now, I'm redeploying Windows Server 2022 just to test for the performance difference. But I was able to measure this difference with multiple tests, multiple different tests, right?
Yeah.
If I compare it with Windows Server 2022. So Windows Server 2025, yes, absolutely legit to test it for the VDI, but ultimately you will not be able to run the VDI on Windows Server 2025 with Windows 11 multi-session. You would have to have Azure Stack HCI.
Maybe
For
teasering is
activating.
something.
Okay.
I will also on the channel there will be a video in I think more or less end of April where we talk to Jeff Folsey.
Uh-huh.
And maybe you can give us some more insights what we will see in the final version of Server 25. We will see. So
That would be awesome.
Subscribe to the channel if you don't want to miss that video. I said it will be April. So our capture date is probably the 15th of April, and shortly after we'll upload it. But as I said, there will definitely be a session with Jeff on more or less future of Windows Server, and also another one on Hyper-V is not dead.
Yeah.
So that's what we what you can expect here. It's in April, and that's then I think shortly before we release the next preview versions or we will introduce more updates into the preview process. So there could be good things, and yeah, I will also ask those highly critical questions about the Azure services or Azure appliance services running on Windows Server in the future.
That would be awesome. Anyway, let's take a look on the VDI results. And in here, there was a task worker and knowledge worker, and that was like density per host. And then IOPS per user. And with that, there are some results like how was the traffic, right, during the logon storm, and how many IOPS were, not much, right? As you can see, it's just, less than 20,000 IOPS. And what was the latency on the system was pretty cool. And then the user experience. So this is like the measurements from the host itself. And then as a result, it was like, yeah, there can be really nice density because as you can read here, the VSA max average score was 1,870 sessions were loaded, which is really cool. And there was somewhere there's mentioned that how many users were there. I think it was 1,200 users or something like that. So in total, so you can use kind of estimation how it will kind of behave, but I would still recommend you to run your own tests, right? Especially then you think about where you will host the FSLogix profiles, because this is probably what will use the most IOPS. When the user will be logging into already existing session host, then you will not have any machine booting, and usually it's the IOPS are caused by the boot storms. It's not about logging user. And if the user is logging, then you either are creating the user profile or attaching the user profile itself. And then when it's the user profile being created, then it will, there will be some IOPS. But when the user profile is already created, then it's just about attaching the VHD over the network, right? So it might not be that much. And if you want to play with FSLogix, I think in this video, in this guide, if you will just navigate into the Azure Stack HCI and AVD MS Lab scenario, which is just a pure PowerShell, then in this pure PowerShell scenario, there is a part where you set up the file share as a virtual machine, and then configure this file share to be an FSLogix host. So more or less, if you grab the VHD from the Azure, it will already have FSLogix installed, but there's also script to install FSLogix, and then configure the FSLogix with a GPO. That is, it's just a sample, so you can adjust it.
Sounds good. So as we are already with the I think we are at a good point to summarize here. So around the guide, around how you should really do your performance testing and come back with actual data to your OEM. So I think we can agree on the guide they're published here gives you a good estimate on what you can achieve, how you should plan it, how you should go for it. But as it is a bit outdated from an operating system and workload perspective, I think we can agree. Take something what you have still there, even if it's a workstation, even if it's an older server. Deploy the actual version you want to work with and get some users to test your workload to get really actual user data and actual deployments and to see your bottlenecks, like discussion we had with storage, if you want to have it remotely or if it needs to be the machine, if you need to use Azure IOV because you have strong knowledge workers or power users running on that machines. And especially if you're using GPUs, you should really plan your failover disaster case on how. And also especially your actual maintenance windows. That's something the operating system and also such guides cannot solve for you as an administrator, as an operator of those environments, because that's changes depending on your user behavior, on your company behavior, on your company itself, where you can plan your maintenance windows and your switch over of machines, more or less. Is that just from a summarization? Do you want to add anything, Jaromir, to that one?
Just about just measure it correctly so you do not over-engineer the solution, right? You can over-engineer the solution to have like a dedicated storage with scale-out file server, SRIOV, guest RDMA, and all of this fancy stuff. And in the end, the only thing you needed was just the one virtual machine for the user profile disk and then another 2 virtual machines for the session host, right? So try to make it simple.
Yeah, there's also one thing I encountered with one of my customers. He had only 1 or 2 power users who need to have those dedicated CPUs with a lot of cores there. And at the end, all others, 99% of his users were just common users without GPU workloads. So you shouldn't also not plan for those 2 users. There is no shame in giving them a desktop, basically.
Yeah, you can have a dedicated virtual machine for them, right?
Yeah.
So if they are just eating a little too much stuff, you can just give them a dedicated machine, but be ready that it's a stateful machine and it needs to be managed, right? Yeah. So sometimes it's just easier just to give them a laptop.
A laptop, or that's what I'm using for my bonus daughter right now. She will use one of my high performance machines within our new house, and she just gets a desktop, a network cable, and so those HDMI USB receivers and a dedicated network cable. So if it's in the same house, if it's in the same building, it's maybe a solution you can just patch it through, and everyone should be happy. But there always maybe other solutions you need to consider instead of putting a lot of GPU workloads for Hans-Peter, who's the only one who needs it.
Absolutely correct.
Perfect. Then I think, Jaromir, we have it for today. If there are questions, I will always forward the comments to you. The people can reach you on LinkedIn. You are always linked in the description video. There was also a session that you recorded from the Service Summit last week.
Yes, I did record 2 sessions. One is for the testing performance for Windows Server 2025, and another one is testing Windows Server 2025 with MS Lab. So there are 2 sessions. It's just 15 minutes, slightly less than 15 minutes. So it's absolutely just for people who don't know how to step into the MS Lab itself. There is this session about how to quickly, spin MSLab and then test Windows Server 2025. And the second one is more or less summarizing the results and then the methodology to test the Windows Server 2025 with VM Fleet.
Then I think we can link that in the video description so that people can follow up if they like. Yeah, everything else. Thank you so much for being with me here, Jaromir. As always, it's always a pleasure. And
anytime.
For everyone else, subscribe to the channel. More great videos coming up. As said, if you don't want to miss the video with Jeff Wolsey, subscribe. It will be in April.
Awesome.
Then have a great one. Bye.
Bye.